Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. And today I'm going to talk about something that the book Living Sober calls Remembering Your Last Drunk. And this has become an incredibly important part of my own recovery. I have been sober from alcohol now for almost 4 years. And one of the most important parts of that sobriety has been remembering really vividly what it was like to be drunk in those last few months and even the last few years of my drinking career, and making sure that when I'm thinking about alcohol or confronted with alcohol, those are the memories I call up, and not the romanticized memories of what drinking was like when I first started, during the times where maybe I could have a beer or two without ending up, passed out on the lawn somewhere of a house that I didn't know. So let's hear what Living Sober has to say about this, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I use this to keep myself in check. And the book says, depending on our age and on the circumstances which surrounded our first experiences with alcohol, we all have various memories and hopes, sometimes anxieties, aroused by the thought of a cool beer, a martini, a gin and tonic, a scotch and soda, a sip of wine, or whatever. Repeatedly in the early drinking of most people, the anticipations were fully met by the desired drink. And if that happened often enough, we naturally learned to think of a drink as a satisfying event. Whether it gratified our need to conform to a religious custom, quenched our thirst, graced a social occasion, relaxed us, stimulated us, or gave us any other kind of satisfaction we sought. For a lot of us, drinking started out fairly innocently. It was something that didn't get us into too much trouble. We were able to keep it fairly similar to our peers. I know that when I started drinking in around college age, my drinking didn't necessarily look that different, at least from the outside, than my peers. My behavior while I was drinking looked pretty similar, although I did get drunk a lot. There weren't that many differences from my peers. But that doesn't last forever for those of us who are alcoholics and addicts. So we really have to be careful when we're in our recovery not to just think about the good old days, because that's where we can get in trouble. We think about those times in the beginning of our alcoholic or addict careers where things weren't as bad as they got. And we start to romanticize alcohol, we start to romanticize drugs, and we start to think, well, maybe I've learned enough now that I can go back to the good times. So that's when we have to get real, we have to get honest with ourselves, and we have to really look at what did drinking and drugging do to us? What road did that lead us down? So here's what the book says about it. A searching, fearless look at our complete drinking record, however, shows that in the last years and months, our drinking never created those perfect magic moments again, no matter how often we tried for them. I'll stop there. I think that for a long time in my drinking career, I was trying to recreate the magic of those first few years that I drank. Those first few years where the consequences seemed to be minimal, where and now that wasn't really true. There were significant consequences. I just couldn't see them back then. But I tried to recreate the magic moments that happened back then. And that's not possible. What happens is we end up chasing a feeling, and we end up chasing that feeling right into the gutter if we're not careful. So instead, over and over, we wound up drinking more than that and landed in some kind of trouble as a result. Maybe it was simply inner discontent, a sneaky feeling that we were drinking too much, but sometimes it was marital squabbles, job problems, serious illness or accidents, or legal or financial worries. Therefore, when the suggestion of a drink comes to us, we now try to remember the whole train of consequences of starting with just a drink. We think the drink all the way through down to our last miserable drunk and hangover. So this is advice I got from a podcast that I listened to for a while, Recovery Elevator. Great show. And they talked a lot about following the drink. And this is not just from that show, but it's guidance that you'll hear a lot in recovery programs. Follow the drink. And if I'm honest with myself, if I confront myself with honesty, integrity, and courage to look at my weaknesses and the way that I really work, and I say, what happens after that first drink? The honest answer is, before I'm done, I'm on to the next one. I'm already chasing the next drink as soon as I take that first sip of the first one. There's no magic moment of satisfaction. There's no relief. There's no simply enjoying the drink for me. That's not the way my brain works. As soon as I get that first sip into me, before it even hits my stomach, I'm already pining after the second drink. And I will not stop that pattern until I'm so drunk that I can't function. And I have to admit that to myself because otherwise I start to get everything twisted and start to think about those magic moments back in the past and start to think maybe I can recreate those now without the same consequences that I faced later in my drunken career. So they go on to say a friend who offers us a drink usually means simply that one sociable glass or two. But if we're careful to recall the full suffering of our last drinking episode, we're not deceived by our long ago notion of a drink. The blunt sight physiological truth for us as of today is that a drink pretty surely means a drunk sooner or later, and that spells trouble. Drinking for us no longer means music and gay laughter and flirtations. It means sickness and sorrow. One AA member puts it this way: I know now that stopping in for a drink will never again be, for me, simply killing a few minutes and leaving a buck on the bar. In exchange for that drink, what I would plunk down now is my bank account, my family, our home, our car, my job, my sanity, and probably my life. It's too big a price, too big a risk. He remembers his last drunk, not his first drink. So it really helps me to do this big time. When I quit drinking, I set a date. I said, I realized I needed to quit. I said, okay, a month from now, I'm going to quit drinking. And I did. That is what happened. And a month from that point, I took my last drink and I haven't had a drink since. In that month, I had some really nasty drunks. And one of them in particular, one of the very last ones that I had, I was in a bar with a friend and I was so hungover from the night before that I had to go to the bathroom after every beer and throw up. I could not stomach the beer that I was trying to force down my gullet. And I was so sick that I went home and I went to bed, couldn't help my wife with our son. It was a terrible feeling. And I remember thinking, even at that time, being grateful that I was experiencing that, because it was fuel for my desire to never be in that situation again. And I knew at that point, and I know still today, that I will be in that situation if I even take one drink. I cannot ever entertain the notion that I'll be able to just have a drink and be satisfied. Even just thinking about it, I can already feel my brain working in the way that it used to. And the way it used to work is I'd go to work for 8 hours, and that whole 8 hours I'd be thinking about how nice it was going to be to have a beer at the end of the day. And then I would get home and I'd open that beer and I'd take that first sip, and for a second I would relax, but only for a second, because immediately I was already thinking about the next beer. And I never enjoyed it. I spent 8 hours anticipating that first beer and never enjoyed it. How twisted is that? How messed up is that? And that's the way that my brain works. That's how I know I can't ever go back and be a normal drinker. I can't ever be a casual drug user. I can't ever do these things with any kind of normal aspect to them. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. I've accepted that now. And remembering my last drunk and the last time that I got really drunk and what it did to me and my family has been a really big part of my ongoing recovery. So, good thing to remember, good advice from Living Sober. I'll be back here tomorrow with more from the book.